Hi and welcome back to the channel. Today I thought it would be good to share with you some thoughts, tricks which help me improve my orchestral mockups, and I divided these 11 tricks into two parts. First part, which is mainly connected with MIDI programming and setting up the tracks, and the second one which pertains mainly to mixing, mastering and other tricks which are crucial if you want to receive this realistic orchestral mockup sound. So without further ado, let's jump into the Cubase. So firstly, let's start with the fake Divisi. When I started using the professional VST libraries, I noticed that most of them did not have the Divisi of first of the second violin. And in some of the situations, this flexibility is crucial when we talk about more complex composition or orchestrations. So I wonder how to achieve the Divisi having only one patch of the first or the second violin. So firstly, we go to our desired VST library, and in the right upper corner we can see this tune knob. So firstly we go down by one semitone and we can close the interface, and after that in the MIDI modifiers section here for our channel we can roll down this menu, we can see the transposition, and now we can invert the function which we implemented previously. So we go up by one semitone. So by default this is the 0, and now we go up. By implementing this thing, we receive the instrument which has the same pitch as the default instrument, but a little bit different timbre. The timbre is darker than the default instrument, and this is really crucial because you may ask, we can simply copy paste the first patch and then we can tweak our instrument into the Divisi. Yes, but we are in the risk of the phasing issue, and the phasing issue is the situation in which some of the frequencies of the instrument stack and result in a synthy sound of the strings. And this is the result which we definitely don't want to get when we talk about the realism of our composition and orchestral mockup. If you want to learn more about the phasing issue and how to deal with it, you can check this video on the channel. And now let's go directly to the second trick. The second one is the Vibrato Automatization. Most of the professional VST libraries nowadays has the ability to control the vibrato. So let's jump again to the Cinematic Studio Strings first violin, and if you get this setting up, you can see that the vibrato X-fade, crossfade can be controlled by MIDI CC2, and this controller can be different, bringing in mind the different developer of the instrument, but you can surely recall these settings when you go to the manual of your desired library. So this is really important thing when we talk about realism, because the real player, the real violinist, when he or she start producing the sound, he or she is unable to produce the sound of vibrato from the very beginning of the phrase. And if we get this to our mind, we should also implement such playing to our artificial VST libraries. And the amount of the vibrato, bearing in mind the VST libraries, is dependent of the emotional impact of the composition and also of the phrasing of our instruments. So now maybe let's listen to the short phrase of the string ensemble with and without the automatization of the vibrato. In my humble opinion, the difference is really subtle but meaningful when we talk about the connection between the instrument and the situation when this string ensemble will sound with also other instruments, so woodwinds, brass section and the percussion. Another important thing impacting the realism of orchestral mockup is layering instruments. But by layering instruments, I mean layering the section instrument with the solo instrument, because when we should realize that in real recordings, some of the players are closer to the microphones than the other of the section. So to imitate this effect, this sound effect into your orchestral mockup, it is good to blend the section of the instruments, for the first violins, for example, and the solo instrument of the same library or other. It doesn't matter if you have the ability to blend the instrument and from the different library developers. So to imitate this effect, this sound effect into the orchestral mockup, we can blend the section instrument, for example, this first violin from the Cinematic Studio strings, and the solo instrument from the same or other developer of the VST libraries. What is more, implementing solo instruments as a layer to your orchestration, to your composition, can also add the definition to the sound at the first point and can separate the instrument section in the composition. So as previously, let's listen to the short phrase of the ensemble with and without the solo instruments implemented. One additional thing to this trick, if you have panned your section of the instrument, for example, the violin to the left, the second violin more center, viola center, etc., etc., I always like to get the solo instrument more centered to the sound in order to also reveal more separation and the definition to the instruments. Fourth trick, micro automatization of CC programming into the sustain notes. In some composition, especially when we are starting our composition or we compose the tension scene, we want to implement some sustain notes of the ensemble or each of the section of the especially string instrument. And to be honest, the default sound of the VST library, the sustain sound, is rather artificial. So from my experience, to reveal some more realism of these VST sample libraries, it is good to implement some micro automatization of CC1 and CC11, so usually expression and modulation of our instruments. And in this respect, we can imitate the micro tonal changes of the instrument when the section players play the sustain notes for the long time or the longer time that is usual played by the players. For the purpose of fifth trick, let's listen to these sustain notes which we played previously with added solo flute and the horn section. As you may heard, the flute and the horns, even if they play the same melody, they don't play it in the same range of time. The micro changes in the time of starting and ending note is noticeable. And this is the real thing, let's say, because when we talk about the real orchestra, the section players never play the note in the same range and amount of time. and this is normal for the human and the human imperfection, because we should realize that making the orchestral mockup, even of our composition or other popular composition, is to imitate the realism of the real orchestra. And in some way, the realism of the orchestra are imperfection of the human. So making these minor changes in starting or releasing the note is a desired level of realism of the orchestral mockup and are normal for the real orchestra. So to sum up, this is really crucial to not quantize the note 100%. And as a side note, the quantization in 100% is crucial, especially for the percussion instruments, so the rhythmic instruments. But when we talk about the melody instrument, harmony instruments, so woodwind, strings, brass, the desired level, from my humble opinion, from my experience, is to keep the quantization below the 100% level. Now let's jump to the mixing stuff. So firstly, panning of the instruments. Most of the instruments now are recorded in the situ, so in the situation where real section of the instrument should be recorded in the real orchestra. But even though, to enhance this effect and to prevent adding the EQ too much to our instrument and to separate and define the section of the orchestra, it is really advisable to implement the panning to your instrument. And how we can do that? We can jump into the mixer of our project, and as you can see here, we have the panning section. And by default in the Cubase, this is the balance panner. And in order to properly pan our orchestral instrument, we should change it by clicking right here to the stereo combined panner. And after that, we are ready to go to tweak separately left and the right channel of our instrument. If you want to learn more about panning of your instrument, implementing the reverbs, EQing and compressing some of the instruments, you can check the video here. And here I prepared the free tool for you to use on your mixing environment into your DAW. Now let's listen of the string ensemble with and without the implementation of the panning. The second mixing tip is panning your reverb sends. As you may know, we usually send our instruments or the group of the instrument to the room reverb and the whole reverb to imitate the sound of the scoring stage. And obviously this is good approach, but in this situation, the source sound of the reverb is centered, even if the individual instrument channel was panned previously, as I've shown you. So how we can deal with that and how we can keep these panning settings for this instrument? We can go directly to editing channel settings here. And as you can see on the right, we can see our reverb sends, but also we can see the panning settings of this reverb sends. And accordingly as previously, we can click here and change it to the stereo combined panner, and again for the whole reverb. And we can independently tweak with the left and the right channel of our reverb send. And we should implement the exact same settings as we implement the panning settings for our individual instrument channel. Third mixing trick in the role is EQing, but EQing the reverb, not instrument, because we usually hear that we should EQ the instrument, and this is important thing, but also important thing is to EQ the source of the reverb. And why this is important? Because when we think about reverb for a while, we can notice that the farther instrument is from the listener, the less higher frequency comes to the listener. So to imitate this sound effect, we should implement some EQ. And in my approach, I usually like to implement the EQ before and after the plugin on the reverb. Before, I implement some low cut, as usually is implemented for the regular instrument, but more important is this shelf to higher frequencies, something around 10 kHz, to imitate this exact situation. Then higher frequencies are less noticeable when the instrument is farther away from the listener. For the second EQ, I usually implement something of the multiband compressor. So this is the compressor settings, but these compressor curves are set to dynamic curves, and this implementation helps me to more control the sound of the reverb, because in some cases the reverb can be too lush and can make my orchestral mixing sounding too muddy. Now let's talk about track delay compensation. In some of the libraries you can notice the situation that even if you play exactly as the metronome clicks, and even if your MIDI notes are in the grid, fit to the grid, the note will not start exactly as the grid starts. And this is the reason of the way how the sample libraries was recorded. So the question is how we can deal with it. And the solution is really simple. When you go to your instrument, again, for example, first violin, and to these settings, you can see this track delay in milliseconds. And here you can set the amount of delay of your track, bearing in mind the grid of the Cubase. But then it raised another question, from where we can get those information. And the solution is also again simple. You can go to your instrument, again Cinematic Studio Strings for this example, go to the manual, click Ctrl F, click milliseconds, MS as the abbreviation, and as you can see, for the short note delay, the manual says that this is the 60 milliseconds. If we go further, for the legato, we can see that for the legato, it will be usually 150 milliseconds. And having this information, we can copy it, go back to our Cubase, go to the first violin patch, and implement for the legato 150. But if you also want to automate this thing, or you want to control this thing directly from the contact player, you can go to this website of the Alex Vincent, which prepared for you the CSS control panel, which address exact amounts of the delay for each of the articulation. The link to the tool, this is the totally free tool, will be set in the description of the video, so you can grab the tool and find out if this is something for you. Another cool function, the Cubase, especially when you are not a professional piano player, is a step recording. And the step recording enables you to play fast passages of strings or woodwinds runs slowly, and after that Cubase will play it in the desired level of the notes which you implement in this function. So how we can do that? We go to the MIDI editor and we can see this step icon here, so click here. After that we should set the desired starting point of our phrase, and one more thing, we should implement the duration of the note which should be implemented to this step recording. For the purpose of this example, we will set the triplets of 16 notes. As the final thing, we should play slowly our passage. And now we can play it in the desired fast tempo. And last but not least, dynamic EQ. And what is it? This is the hybrid of EQ and compression in the one plugin. And this is really important, especially for the short articulation, because we know that short articulation tend to be more uncontrolled rather in comparison to the lush legato patches of the strings especially. So how we can implement dynamic EQ? We can go to our mixer. Let's open the first violin patch of spiccato, and here I have the FabFilter Pro Q4, but I'm sure that this dynamic EQ function is also implemented by other developers. And what we can see here, we can see that we have regular EQ curves, this low cut, this shelf above the 10 kilohertz, but also we have this muddy cut of the EQ, and underneath we have the additional curve. And this additional curve is exactly the dynamic EQ curve, which acts as a compressor. So it reacts to the amount and the level of a gain throughout the time of playing of the instrument. And how we can implement it? Let's add additional curve here, for example. And as you can see, this curve is the regular now, but if we want to make it dynamic, we can click this triangle here and click Make Dynamic. After that, we are able to tweak it. So making the acting of the compressor more aggressive by taking this curve down, or less aggressive but taking it up. And as I said, implementing this dynamic EQ, especially to the short articulation, to the string passages of the short articulation arpeggios, for example, can help you control the sound and make the sound more glued to each other. And I usually like to implement this dynamic EQ, especially for the muddy frequencies of the string, so around 200 and 500 Hertz. So now let's hear of the short passages of the short strings with and without the implementation of this dynamic EQ curve. And that way we reach the end of the video. I hope you find useful at least one trick which I show you today. If you found the video helpful or you want to see more tricks like this, by the way, I can definitely share more, let me down in the comments. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really motivates me to improve and grow the real community. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy composing and mixing.